Welcome and thank you for joining us in this latest instalment of the Ace Records podcast, hosted by myself, Pete Pavidis. Today we're here to celebrate the music and legacy of a band that helped define their era with a string of records whose fearless, affirmative sound and spirit burns as brightly today as it did over 5 decades ago when their final album in their original incarnation was released. Their individual stories began in Middle America, but their paths converged in Hollywood in the mid-60s, where it became apparent that the demonic, thrilling noise they made together exceeded its constituent parts. Formed around the quixotic talents of their frontman Sky Saxon, the Seeds' self-titled debut album is that rarest of things, a flawless opening salvo of songs that set out its creators' uncompromising terms of engagement. It spawned one of the great debut singles of all time, Can't Seem to Make You Mine, and the group's only top 40 hit, the equally brilliant Pushin Too Hard. It was a purple patch they continued with a web of sound and the psychedelic masterpiece Future, and also Raw and Alive, the 1968 live album, which 10 years later John Savage described as downright insultingly simple garage rock and roll that, in its unself-consciousness and rightness, wipes the floor with a disturbingly high proportion of those groups all around these days who are trying so hard to be rock and roll. With every passing year, their legend grows a little bit brighter, and part of that is thanks to longtime fans, friends and colleagues such as Alec Palao. As well as occasionally playing bass for the current lineup, Alec has lovingly overseen a thorough programme of expanded Seeds reissues, and he's produced a feature-length documentary telling the story of the Seeds entitled Pushin Too Hard. I'm delighted to say that he's here with me, but so is legendary founding member and keyboard player with the Seeds, Daryl Hooper, and also the band's current drummer, Don Boomer. Gentlemen, how lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm glad you're still awake after that intro.
Especially after jet lag.
Yeah, no, how are you doing? Are you better?
I'm doing pretty good, really.
Yeah? It's really lovely to meet you. I mean, it is one of those incredible things where, you put these records on and they have a kind of contemporary sort of feel. If they were made yesterday, you'd be pretty thrilled about it as a music fan.
Well, thank you. That's nice to hear. You never knew back in the day it was going to live this long.
There's a sort of there's a kind of untutored gusto about. Well, not in your case. There was nothing untutored about you, because there was a lot of the virtuosity in the band came from the way that you played. But was there a pressure to sort of dial it down a bit to sort of serve the primal excitement of what you were doing?
No, you know what? We just did what we did. We didn't have a lot of, we just did another interview here with the BBC and asked the question, did you plan things out or did you try to copy something from the Rolling Stones or the so-and-so whatever groups? And we really did not, What happened was just coming from our heart and our guts. And it was what came out in that era.
I mean, I get the impression you weren't actually listening too closely to too many of your contemporaries.
Not as far as, we were definitely listening, but we weren't trying to do that in our own music.
Yeah. Because a lot of the things that you did were actually you were first to do.
True.
And I think maybe because certainly over here you didn't have so much of a commercial profile. People are not so aware of that. You in particular, you came over from. Unlike Sky, you had a fairly sort of conventional sort of background, didn't you?
I did. I was a classically trained musician as a child.
And was it, what made you want to sort of leave all that? What made you want to leave Detroit behind?
Well, the drummer and I were great friends from junior high school, and we just always had the dream of coming to California, and that's what we did right out of high school. And left, and we really didn't come out to form a group and become rock and rollers, but It just sort of happened. We got a call one day from Sky Saxon, and he needed a keyboard player, and Rick, the drummer, I said, he needs to come along with me. Oh, great. And we played one job together, just doing cover songs of Who Knew What that night, and it just clicked. And from that point on, we just, a little later on, started writing our own material, and it grew from there.
So how old were you when you actually sort of left your parents' home?
18.
So, you know, like I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and if she packed up the car,
Yeah.
like you guys did,
Yeah.
and said,
Yeah.
I'm off to...
Drove 3,000 miles across the country. You'd probably be upset. My mom had tears in her eyes, but I had great parents, and they were supportive of whatever I wanted to do.
So you loaded, what was the car? The car was a 57 Chevy, is that right?
Yeah, that was Rick's car. I had a 57 Ford convertible, and mine had a little mechanical problem, so we were both saving money and decided, well, let's take your car and we'll pool our money and let's go. And we just went out and got just jobs in a department store or something as stock boys right at first, just to make enough money to pay the rent for an apartment and whatever. And then, like I say, Sky happened to call and things fell into place and we became musicians. We had played together in little bands back in Michigan together.
Yeah.
So, you know, we were musicians, but we didn't necessarily have the goal right at the start to become big rock and rollers. But it all sort of fell into place.
And but was there never a sort of a minute or a day or an hour where you sort of regretted, you know, leaving, going so far away?
Never.
Really?
No, I've only been back once, and that was 40 years ago. So, no.
Really?
Never,
just once, really?
Yeah, never really regretted ever.
What made you go back, after all that time, what made you go back once?
My mom and dad still lived there at the time.
Right, okay.
They both passed away now, and they did finally move to California too, eventually.
Okay.
But it took many years.
Amazing. And your original plan was to go to piano tuning school?
Yeah. And like, not very thinking through teenagers, never bothered to check it out, and finally get to California in the school and find out it's booked up for a year and you can't get in.
I didn't even know there was such a thing as piano tuning
Oh
school.
yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. And you would have been, obviously not figuring the story yet, Don, but you would have been a contemporary, or where do we find you in the timeline?
Yeah, so actually I was a bit younger, but yeah, I was in other groups in Hollywood at the time, and of course, you know, the Seeds were on the radio. You know, we all listened to the Seeds.
Do you remember hearing the Seeds on the radio?
Oh, absolutely. You bet.
Okay, I mean those. I don't often get sort of envious of people who are, you know, in their teens or whatever at that time. But one thing I do get slightly envious about is because having that contemporaneous feel for records that would have come out at that time, and sort of seeing what it would have sounded like in the context of everything else happening. So, what did those early first records sound like to you as a fan?
Well, California kind of had its own sound compared to the East Coast, where rock had more of a swing feel to it, as much as it did maybe here in Britain.
Yeah.
Where on the West Coast, I think the music, at least in Southern California, had rock and roll started with kind of like surf music.
Yeah.
Which Jan had been in a surf band, I had been in a surf band, and surf bands, that music, to be different than East Coast music, was very straight and very strictly on the beats.
Yeah.
There was no swing to it at all. It's very mathematical and mechanical.
Yeah.
It's just a different sound.
Absolutely.
You know, but like Daryl said, in those days, I mean, everybody wanted to be different than somebody else. We listened to everybody, but if you played something that sounded like somebody else, you changed it. You didn't play what somebody else was playing.
Right.
You wanted to be as far away from that as possible. Everybody wanted to have their own unique sound.
But inevitably, you take elements of things. And
Well, you take elements of everything you've ever heard, and you personalize that. And each person, what you like to listen to is because you've listened to hundreds or thousands of things, and you've extracted little parts, and you kind of construct that into a path that goes. And I think that's what happens. That's what happens with the band,
Jan,
the personalities.
You mentioned Jan, the guitarist in the band, having been kind of raised on surf guitar, and so that was definitely sort of in the makeup of the sort of early sort of sound of the group, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Your first conversation with Sky was on the phone, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. He just needed a keyboard player and got my name somehow. I'm not even sure how, and said, "Can you play a gig? And would you like to?" And we were very hungry for money at that moment, and wondering where our next meal was coming from. Literally, as like I said, I think I was 19 and 18. I think we had to eventually. In fact, a little funny story. Early on, when we were playing together and we were playing these different bars and things, and you had to be 21 to play, I had to end up getting a fake ID to be 21, not to drink, but just to get in there and play music. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
So what were you actually living on? Didn't you get one job where you were paid in spaghetti or something?
That was one of the early times on. Yeah, we were happy to get it. All the beer and spaghetti we could eat, and $7 a night we got. Wow. Plus the food, and the food was what was important.
Absolutely. Okay. What were your first impressions of Sky then, as a sort of as someone to be in a band with?
Well, we hit it off really well in the early days. Sky wasn't quite as far out there as he got to be later on, but he was. And when we first got together, we were doing cover tunes like most bands do, but it wasn't too much. Maybe 6 months into being together, that we started writing together and things, and coming up with songs. And
did every band have to know those covers to survive in a barroom environment?
Yes. Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So what would be, can you give me an example of a song that you could just kind of whip out and that would just keep the peace?
Oh,
Well, if I could just interject there, the only surviving recording there is of the Seeds doing a cover, which is I think live recording from the Century Club that Rick had, is Land of a Thousand Dances.
Right. Okay.
But it's a very strange, slow. It doesn't sound like the Midnighters or whatever, or Cannibal and the Headhunters, or whichever one was, sort of in the air at that moment. It's very slow and just Sky kind of just deadpan intoning, no. So, but that's the only one I've ever known about.
I remember doing What I Say, Ray Charles.
I mean, everyone had to do that, didn't they?
Yeah, right. Twist and Shout.
What was your version of What Did I Say? Like, I'd love to hear the Seeds version of What Did I Say.
And you did a more. I do know that Daryl sang a song. In fact, in the latest ACD's soundtrack, there's a photo of him singing it. A song called Mickey Mouse, which was originally done by Denny Provisor, who's sort of like one of those guys who got into like folk rock or whatever. But that was Daryl's star turn, right?
Yeah,
right. Evil secrets here.
Yeah, right.
But you would all take a turn to sing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we would in the early days. Yeah.
So Can't Seem to Make You Mine was clearly, that was the first song that inspired you to kind of go and get an acetate made, is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Where was well, my understanding of it is that the band was cooking enough that by April 1965, they pooled enough money, and there was a fellow called Jimmy Madden who was sort of like a Hollywood guy around town, actually an old school guy, but he's like, oh, this new rock and roll. A lot of the Hollywood hustlers were a little confused by the British influence, and and so someone like Sky Saxon had been around for 6 years trying to make it as a Bobby or a Frankie, and hadn't gone anywhere because he couldn't really sing in that style, and he didn't look like a movie star. All of a sudden the ugly guys from England are popular, so he's got an outlet. And and he certainly had a lot of experience and everything, and so he was connected to a lot of the lower level hustlers in Hollywood. So this guy Jimmy Madden, who ran teenage nightclubs, got together with him, and they that's the band went in the studio, Weston, recorded that, and then that became the demo that would be shopped around. In fact, on the tape box it says Richard Marsh. It doesn't even say Seeds. So.
Wow. Okay. And so. But even then, you didn't get a deal straight away, did you?
No, we'd pooled our own money to go in and make an acetate. But Sky pounded the pavement and come up with the Crescendo Records, and they paid for us to go into the studio and re-record it and do it properly and whatever. And
a lot of the reason.
Sorry, go on.
A lot of the reason why that song works is sort of what you bring to it, really, those kind of hints of Baroque kind of
thank you.
flourish. Was it just sort of a matter of all of you just sticking to what you did best and not really sort of analysing it too much, or what?
Those questions are always hard for me to answer. I mean, so many of the things, they just sort of evolved, and you did what you did. They weren't thought through and say, well, if we do this or we do that, this could happen. It didn't work that way.
Absolutely, yeah. It tends not to, does it, with bands?
No.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just interject again, an interesting thing I've observed from what Daryl and the other guys have told me, and that I hear from some tapes, is that a lot of stuff was kind of partly evolved on the bandstand. Because these guys were working a lot in those days, different clubs around things, and so you hear on the studio the studio chatter on all the tapes. It's like, oh well, this isn't how we played it last night at the club or whatever, blah blah. I mean, like Evil Hoodoo is a classic example of that.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent, while Daryl was the technician, he was a conduit for Sky. Sky might have a lyric or an idea, but it was Daryl who put it together. I mean, the sound of the band is really down to Daryl.
Yeah.
And I think, but a lot of that kind of just evolved organically, like Daryl says. I don't think there was a plan, as far as I haven't been able to observe. A sort of write a song and record it type situation.
Evolved is a better word than calculated.
Right.
I think every band needs a virtuoso, don't they? And you need a sort of. Every band also needs someone who can talk a great record, but you also need someone who can kind of somehow, like a Daryl in a way, who can sort of. Yeah. It can make.
Well, he's a translator for Sky's brainstorms, But I think that's what makes them special, because it's very organic kind of rock and roll. There's no Svengali guiding it. There's no one in the booth saying do this, do that. There's no session guys coming in outside of Harvey Sharp, the bass player they used, because they didn't have a bass on stage. Daryl just hit the low notes hard, and then you got the keyboard bass later.
Yeah. And that was something you were doing before Ray in the Doors.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a great idea, isn't it? Also a very economical idea.
Yes,
you have to pay a bassist.
Right.
You should have ended up getting twice as much.
I should have.
How long did that? So that sort of seminal debut album. How long did that actually take to get it down?
In those days, I mean, we were performing these songs in clubs and things, and so when we were ready to record them, when we went in, it was like 3 takes or something usually. That might be an average.
It didn't. It actually. I mean, again, sorry, I don't want to keep interrupting.
It's all good.
That first album was actually done. Comprised of sessions that go almost as far back as the first record. Because Can't Seem to Make Your Mind was done in April, was released in June, and they went back in the studio that same month and started doing stuff. And various other sessions through the year into the beginning of the next year. So it was actually that album actually took a year to do. What was great is that GMP Crescendo, being the kind of label that their bread and butter was as much albums as singles. There's no problem for Gene Norman to say go back in the studio and cut more stuff. We'll do an album. And the fact that it's one of the very first rock and roll records, certainly from the United States, and I would wager in Hollywood, of all self-composed material. There's no covers on there at all, which is, as we were just talking about, very unusual.
It is incredible. I mean, you have to sort of go, even with the Beatles, you'd get the odd song on an album as early on as up until that point that might be a cover.
Yeah, there was a point in our career early on where when we, like I said, we were talking about doing cover songs, where one night we had enough material, we said, okay, this is the last night we're doing any cover at all. No more requests, no nothing, it's our material.
Yeah.
And that's what we wanted to present on our first album, which we did.
And it sounds incredible even now. I mean, and like Alex said, a lot of that is sort of down to the way you play. It's a hard life, I think, is a case in point. You get such a great sound on that record. How do you even get your keyboard to sound like that?
Well, that was the Wurlitzer, the old Wurlitzers of the day, electronic piano.
Do you still use one now?
I do. A lot of shows I'm not able to get them there, so we have it kind of in an electronic box, but we're 99 9/10 have that sound, and then you wouldn't know the difference. But like here, we're performing with a rented Wurlitzer.
Oh, okay, right.
A real one.
A real one.
Makes a difference.
It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
it does.
Because a lot of keyboard players do tend to sort of update. One thing that struck me that was very sweet, because someone in my naivety, I think back to that period, and I think that the gap between your generation and your parents must have been almost unbridgeable, but it doesn't always seem to be the case. And I sort of read this detail about Jan's mother making you T-shirts.
Yeah, right at first, yeah. And then later on, my mother was a seamstress, and I would design my own clothing, and she would make it. Even though she lived 3,000 miles away, she'd do a mock-up, send it out, try it on, change it, send it back, and then I'd get the finished product in the mail made out of velvet or something.
I mean, that's incredible. You hear these stories. It's not always the case. I mean, everyone knows about. Has probably read at some point about Jim Morrison and his kind of military father whose kind of authoritarian stance against him almost made Jim rebel even more. But it's lovely to hear these instances that go against type, where you had. They must have, on one level, they must have been kind of scared of what turning up to visit you and seeing your hair twice as long as.
Right. Yeah. In a way, they were. Like I said, I was truly blessed with wonderful parents, and my father was a musician early on in life in the 1930s and played in a little radio band called the Melody Makers and did swing of the era, and so he was always supportive of whatever kind of music. And but I'm sure there was a lot of stuff that we did that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
I first got married and had hair down to here. The wedding pictures, my hair is longer than the wife's, so it's like, that was a little strange. I think that was even stranger for my in-laws.
Yeah, and how were they with it?
They accepted it. There was probably a few comments, but they did it. It wasn't a lot of problem. I was blessed with people that were receptive. They may not truly have understood it all, but they went, well,
absolutely,
okay.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about before we do, let's talk about being pop stars, which you would have briefly have been without a doubt going well into 1966.
Right.
There was by that time there was quite a bit of hysteria surrounding the group, wasn't there?
Serious what?
Hysteria.
Oh yeah. Once the group got big, there was many shows where I can remember one in particular, and there was more than one that. The fans were ripping off pieces of clothing and everything else, and
was that behaviour that was just would have happened anyway in the States, or was some of it learned from what had happened with Beatlemania?
That's a good question. I don't know if I could answer that one.
Yeah. And
I think, I mean, you have to remember that sort of, especially from teenage girls or pre-teenage girls, hysteria, that goes back to the Bobby Soxer days of Sinatra and Johnny Ray and everything. So, but I think the Beatles sort of raised it up a notch, where every show you go to where a band was popular with that age group, it would just be screams and everything like that. And I think the Seeds, especially when after Pushin Too Hard became a top 40 hit, but more importantly in Los Angeles area where they were absolutely the kings of the county. They every show for over a 6-month period was nothing but screams and girls mobbing them and stuff.
And what kind of individually, sort of within the band, how did that affect you all?
Well, it definitely made you feel like a star. I'll say that. Yeah.
I guess and
some of it at the exact moment that's happening, not necessarily the playing in the audience, that was cool, except it made it hard to hear because the technology of playing on stage, I know that's what the Beatles finally quit playing. Well, that was a problem. PA systems, whatever, hearing what the vocalist is doing or the guitar player's doing, it's an extreme problem. So that was one of that. You sometimes might wish if the crowd wasn't yelling so much, you could hear a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that's a technical thing. And then, but the behinds, like I can remember a couple instances where the security wasn't that great and girls got back and got at you and literally I had a sleeve ripped off me and things like that, and they wanted to take a piece of you home. That's a little scary at the moment. Yeah. Later you can look back at it and be, oh, that was cool or whatever, but I lived through it. I didn't get a broken arm. They didn't get my arm. They only got my shirt.
In the movie, the Seeds documentary, Jan tells a great story about how they played in Honolulu, where it was like absolute pandemonium, and some poor old policeman was like, he ended up in the hospital, you know, being trampled by the teenage girls. But as Jan says, we made the papers. You know?
Well, and I can remember too, them getting up on stage and stuff, knocking out cables and things, and we'd lose the guitar, or we'd lose the vocal mic or something until somebody figured out, because people were tripping over stuff, because in those days nobody dressed it like they do now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
So.
yeah. And what kind of an effect did all of that have on Sky?
Well, if I can visualize it, his ego went.
I think it
like that.
definitely went to Sky's head a little bit more than any of the rest of us. We were still able to, I think, maintain what was really going on.
Yeah. And how would that manifest itself then? You say, it went a little bit more to his head. What were the early signs, if there were any?
Well, I don't want to speak on these guys' behalves, but I could just offer. When they became successful, right at that moment in time, they got a manager, a transplanted Brit, Lord Tim Hudson, who was a DJ on was it KHJ? Was it or KFWB? I don't know, one of the big AM stations and he, Sky. Just a little bit of background. He's a Mormon. Came from Salt Lake City. At one point, he'd gone down that path, which and was going to be sort of a higher up in the church, a deacon or what they call that. But he left that, came to Hollywood to kind of become a star. It took him a while, but all of a sudden he did become a star. So he had a little bit of like that intensity. Drugs obviously came into play too, and then his ego just was swelled first by the growing response to the Seeds, because the Seeds was super hip in like mid '66, neck and neck with Love and the Doors as the underground band of LA, and then along comes Lord Tim and starts really whispering in his ear about blah blah, you're a superstar and da 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 da. And his ego kind of went in overdrive, and he started thinking that anything, because all the things he'd done, like Can't See to Make Your Mind, Pushing Too Hard, had worked. That whatever he's going to deliver next is going to work too, and everyone's going to love it. But of course, by that time, it was Lord Tim had come up with this flower power hype, which really became a millstone. And so Sky thought, well, we'll put this, that, and the other on in our records and blah blah, which retrospectively makes it interesting for the likes of you and I. But for all the hipsters that were listening to the Springfield or the Airplane or the Dead or whatever, all the San Francisco thing, and here's a bunch of guys with screamers. And a guy going on about whips and crows and stuff like that on his records. It got to. So I think my point is that it just was cumulative with Sky. And the sad thing is that it and again I don't want to speak for Daryl, but I think it put a wedge between him and the other guys in the band, because at the beginning they were a unit doing this together, and then all of a sudden it became Sky.
Well, there's a long tradition of either managers or label guys kind of coming in and sort of taking the singer to one side and creating that. It's divide and rule, isn't it? Yeah. And how did Tim even end up becoming your manager? Sorry, Lord Tim.
Lord Tim. He was a disc jockey on the radio and quite popular in Los Angeles, and he came to some show and approached us as wanting to be a manager, and we had gone through. I think we had some not very knowing type manager at the time, and not a solid contract type situation. But anyway, Tim said, well, I can do this and I can do that, so we decided to give it a go, and he did. Tim, to me, is a double-edged sword. Some people didn't like him, say that was a bad move, and the other side says, oh, that was good. And I'm kind of right in the middle. He did know a lot, and he had some connections, and he did get us going. Gave us an extra kick up the ladder.
Well, before we get sort of more deep into sort of maybe his kind of effect on you sort of artistically, I wanted to sort of dwell on A Web of Sound, the second album, which has got some extraordinary work from yourself on it in particular.
Thank you.
And just this, the sheer outrageousness, I guess, of just having a song that's 14.5 minutes long in 1966. No one had kind of come close to doing that, had they?
No, the Stones had one that was 11 minutes or something.
Going Home.
Going Home.
Aftermath.
Yeah. But that I think that evolved from the shows.
Yeah.
Because we would do it usually at the end of the show and stuff, and it got longer and longer, and people got more into it and whatever else, and we decided to just do it on an actual recording, and the record company went along with it and said, well, okay.
Is that another one of the benefits of being on a label that kind of maybe was more used to putting out jazz records?
Possibly.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, had the band not been on Crescendo, I think different things would have happened.
Yeah.
You know, so that was a kind of a unique thing, because actually we were their only rock act, right?
Yeah.
Did they have?
Yeah,
Really
they had
didn't have-
surf bands.
Sort of, but-
they had a
but-
couple surf acts.
Yeah.
They had Surf Cruise there, then they had sort of pop surf like the Challengers, but you know they really.
But nothing else.
Well,
like what
most
we-
of if there was any other rock groups like the other half, for example, the Fire Escape, it tended to be mostly on 45s or singles. You know, the Seeds were the only album rock album act.
Yeah.
You know, on
So you're right. Maybe they didn't quite. Maybe they didn't know to say no.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean,
of course
it was a learning process for everybody.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
What are your favourite songs on there? We got to talk about Mr. Farmer, surely. I mean, that's
Well, Daryl wrote that song, of course, although he's not credited for writing the song. As most of the songs, Daryl really wrote the music for everything.
Because Up in Her Room is one of yours.
Yeah, but no, I wrote most of the music for all the songs, and Farmer in particular. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning one day, and I had the entire song in my head, and I went to the keyboard and I recorded it on a little reel, and went to Sky the next day, and he wrote the lyrics for the song. So,
Wow.
yeah, and I'm very proud of that song. I think it's a catchy little melody that kind of sticks with you.
It is, and it's kind of it's what was I'm trying to think the film that it was used on.
What's that one? Something about
Almost
Almost Famous.
Almost famous.
Famous.
That's what it
Almost
was.
Famous.
Yeah.
It was in that.
Yeah.
I think it's been used in something else too. But yeah.
That must have been a good year for you.
Yeah.
It is an incredible song. I mean, and also there's so much. It covers so much ground, this record. You know, if you sort of like in terms of the kind of mark of progress from the first album, it's still at its heart. You know, it retains all the things that that people loved about the first album. But if you think about a song also like A Faded Picture, which reveals something. You know, I almost wonder if you learn more about Sky through the lyrics of that song than you might have done prior to anything else about him at that point. It's a fascinating song, isn't it?
It is. It was even more fascinating to watch him perform it, or especially in the recording studio.
Really?
He had so much emotion that he would pour out into it. Yeah. There was times that certain songs, maybe that one in particular, that you'd get a tear in your eye. He had a lot of emotion that he could pour out into that microphone.
And
Yeah.
was he? Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that. I mean, one thing I've observed, I've listened to as much Seeds music as these guys did, because I went through every scrap of every single session tape. It's a marvel at just like he really was for all his faults or whatever, he put it out there. I mean, that's him. He's not trying to be somebody else or whatever. Blah blah blah. He might. Later years he got a little derivative in terms of like he was just losing ideas, so he might ape Morrison a little bit or something like that. But 1965, 1966, he's totally on top of his game and willing to try anything. And at that time, that moment in the rock firmament, or however you want to describe it, it was completely cutting edge. And I mean, I think of Web of Sound, it's probably my favorite album just because it's so. I mean, I love the right from the cover. It's like a pop arty kind of sort of a feel to it. It's not like the first album, which is just like ram-a-lam all the way through, and then it's not like Future, which is more diffuse. It's got all the experimentalism of the later album, but the sort of energy of the first album.
Feels to me in a way a little bit like a companion piece to the second album by them, obviously, which came out over here, which again just sees that slight kind of sonic migration from a really raw proto-punk energy to moments of confessional moments, reflective moments, and I sort of almost kind of feel like they're kind of companion pieces in my head. Had you heard Van Morrison and them at that point? Were you aware of what they were doing?
I knew the group again. Sure, I listened to these different musics, but I didn't say, well, I'm going to try to emulate this or
No,
that.
I thought you might have been slightly
Or-
before, if anything. But it's just kind of interesting.
Well, I think it was hard to avoid having a little bit of Gloria in any kind of rock band from 1966. You know, it's like,
Yeah, absolutely. But even sort of to think about like even their version of "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue," I sort of
right,
think,
sure.
sort of edging it sort of in that direction. So, so I'm hearing. I don't know for sure really, but going into the sort of full blown, well, not full, but the kind of definitely the sort of like more lysergic direction of Future. I'm kind of sensing maybe this was kind of Lord Tim having more of a sort of explicit effect on the direction of the band. Is that right? Or do correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it's more Sky's evolving, and maybe he probably was influenced. Sky probably was influenced with Sgt. Pepper. Not that music's anything like it, but what it is like trying to use other instruments and things into the situation. The flute, the tuba, the harp player, all of the different things that were put into the music. So I think Sky was probably influenced with that, and then he presented to us, and we had the basic songs, and we would do that as we performed, and then in the recording studio it kind of changed, and that wasn't the rest of the band's idea. That was Sky mainly.
Yeah, I might add that Future was fully recorded and finished before Sgt. Pepper came out, so it's it was
well,
that doesn't mean that what the Beatles or the way pop music was going wasn't an influence. It's obvious. I think it's because you started recording Future right at the when you had your highest success. When you had Mr. Farmer, Can't Seem to Make You Mine was like reissued and huge in LA. So you go in the studio like, wow, what are they going to do now? And that's when Sky kind of said, well, I want to do this and I want to do that. And he's got Lord Tim whispering in his ear, you can do that. Because if you on the reissue that I put together for Big Beat, the double CD on the second disc, what I thought was really interesting was present some of the songs without all the augmentation. So you could really just hear the seeds playing those songs as opposed to like the harps and the flutes, and which I think it's all wonderful accompaniment, but I still want to hear what it is that attracts me to Seeds music in the first place.
When you heard back, I guess you must have not heard a lot of these raw versions for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Were you surprised that there was this, even here there was this a version of the Seeds that perhaps you might have
forgotten?
Yeah.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
That's interesting. And again, some of the I don't know. Did you Sky? I'm guessing because guys in their 20s don't really have these kinds of conversations with each other. But were there conversations where Sky would sort of tell you what inspired certain songs?
Slightly. Well, more if you asked him. Like if I asked, I'd work with him, mostly, and lyrics. He would. A lot of them were more inspired, I think, by relationships with girls. Pushin' Too Hard, everybody thinks was written as a protest song or something. It was written because of a girlfriend that dumped him, or he was dumping her. It was like, you're pushing too hard on me and I don't want you to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And then it evolved into, and it's one of those kind of songs, that particular one, that can reflect to a lot of different incidents, not just the girl. It can be a protest song against the war or something else, your job.
And I think that's kind of the mark of a great song often, is that it can be written about one thing
and it can apply to other instances, and I think that's the case with a lot of that. But I think he wrote off of things that were either happening to him or he was observing. He was always doing that, and he was always writing down lyrics and things.
I mean, I would absolutely agree with that. My observation that the way that the sort of his writing developed, because you notice, starting with Mr. Farmer, he's getting sensitive to what's happening social culturally, I mean, the farm, everyone thinks is about, growing marijuana or whatever, blah, blah, but it's actually about getting back to the land sort of a thing. And then, he's expanding that into, and Tim's pushing towards, flowers, blah, 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 go that way, da, da, da. And so, but, I mean, some of these concepts are totally bizarre. I mean, flower lady and her assistant, or
I love that song.
what exactly is he trying to say there? I mean, I don't think anybody knows. He probably doesn't even know. Six Dreams. I mean, that's just like a very, very strange piece of music, and I'm literally, you're listening to tape, you can see like Daryl and Jan, Rick scratching their heads and like, okay, because this guy saying, I wanted to sound like a crow or.
There's a little bit of that, but so much of it's funny at band, especially the four of you would start to play something, and it starts off with a chord here or a guitar thing here or something, and all of a sudden it just starts to grow and grow, and it's almost an entity within itself. Yeah. It's almost, you can't even control it at times. Yeah. It's an odd thing. It's like you don't necessarily sit down. It's not like Beethoven or something where they have everything in their head and they take the pencil and they write it all out, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it's perfect. It has an entity within itself coming out of you.
But it evolves. Yeah, you're not trying to go from point A to point B. You're starting on point A and you're going, where do we end up? And you just do it until
this guy would have maybe Six Dreams as one of those
and
odd,
we'll go there.
Little strange thing or something, and he may have gotten that one from some LSD trip, but he would present those lyrics and hum a little melody or something, and I'd start, let me hear this little organ here, and pretty soon, all of a sudden it started revolving and sounding Eastern or something, and it would just grow.
I mean, speaking of which, the oddest or most atonal sounding song on that record was the first one's recorded for the sessions at the end of 1966, which is "Travel with Your Mind," right? And that's actually Daryl playing the
guitar,
12-string, like I say, kind of atonal, but it's not a sound you heard in pop. And in fact, if you listen to the track, the way it was, there were several like bounce downs. They cut it and they bounced the instruments down to another tape and added more stuff, blah blah. But the actual original thing, the bass sound is this kind of weird sort of tabla-ish type of rhythm going on. It's a bit like that early version of Tomorrow Never Knows by the first take of Tomorrow Never Knows.
And also it's prefiguring 8 Miles High, which is a sort of a song like that, which is kind of made in the same spirit of adventure and trying to make new noise in a kind of what's loosely a rock sort of vernacular.
We did like to experiment with music, and I think the whole rock era of that time is kind of experimental in a way,
We probably didn't know better what was wrong. Right. We didn't know what we couldn't do. Well, nobody told us, well, you can't do that, or we never said, well, you can't do that. We said, well, let's do this and see what happens.
Yeah,
it's
let's
fresh
try
snowfall,
this,
isn't it? It's you're kind of walking through fresh snowfall. And,
well, that was a wonderful thing about that. Daryl says that time it was everybody, because there was still that pioneering aspect of everything. It wasn't like hard and fast by the 70s when everything had been done. Every permutation of chords and melody and this and that and da da da. It was there was that really kind of just openness, if the inspiration's there, it works great. If it's not there, then it becomes like I say, I mean, so there's some moments of pure inspiration on Future, but there's also some stuff that
Well, and some of these songs too didn't start anything like the way they ended up. I mean, the earlier versions completely went left, and what you hear, see, when you have a recording of it, especially from the old days when we didn't have things on YouTube and like we did. Anyway, you start one way and you end up another, but there's no record that anybody else hears. They only hear the final finished product.
Of course.
And so you begin, because you hear that so many times, you think, oh, that's just entirely what they intended. And frankly, if you'd come to any of our shows, every one of the songs might have been different every time we played it after that too.
And it was happening everywhere, wasn't it? That's why, one great thing about these expanded reissues, and one thing I love about listening to the expanded reissues of Beatles albums, where you hear the alternate takes, is that a song is this kind of fluid thing, and you really get to understand what Bob Dylan means about sort of not really wanting to stick too closely to record, to doing what he did on, say, September the 12th, 1966, because that's just what he did on September the 12th, 1966. So I guess there's probably an element. Do you try and preserve some of that in the way that you guys play together now, or do you try and kind of maintain some kind of fidelity to the people's memories of these records?
I'd say the second. We're trying. I think now there's still ourselves, and there may be a little bit of the excitement of the moment, and something might change slightly.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're trying to give the audience a feel and performance of the real thing that happened in the 60s.
The energy that happened.
It's very much an energy thing.
More important than
feeling the energy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not. I mean, let's put it this way: our versions of Seeds classics or any of the Seeds material might not be exactly the same, but they are authentic in terms of the way they're presented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Better way to put it.
And so, so what do you plan? In terms of a sort of touring, gigging entity together, are you doing a lot these days?
No.
I wouldn't say a lot. We're playing. We've been playing in California quite a little bit. This is the first time over here to the UK, and super glad to be here, by the way.
Sorry.
But I think it's rolling, it's evolving.
It's evolving, and it's not like we want to work every week or something. I mean, let's face it, we're not 20 anymore. So, but we hope to work more, and we hope to come to Europe a bit more, and come back to the UK.
And the other aspect is too, Sky Saxon, R.I.P. bless his heart. He spent a lot of time in Europe in the 80s and 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
So a lot of people saw Seed's music being performed by Sky, but of course he wasn't performing it anything like he did on the records. So I think that we have to let people know about us and or know about the band, and that Daryl and Don, the surviving members, are presenting the music in the spirit of the band when it was at its peak.
Yeah.
And it's not the same as what Sky would do in previous decades.
Sky, of course, continued to evolve, and to continue to move away from that music. And for a long time, he performed, and sometimes he used the name The Seeds, and sometimes he didn't.
Yeah.
But where he ended up wasn't what we do. I mean, we are more true to that body of work from the '60s, but not note for note. Not note for note that's on the records.
Oh, of course.
We're not a cover band. We are the Seeds, and we are still ourselves, and our heart is still coming out to you.
I'm sure. I mean, what about the? Before we come, I want to get on to talking about the present and the film, but before I do that, I want to just talk a little bit about the, those sort of the period around Future where, I read somewhere that sort of, at this point it was kind of quite hard for Jan to stay in a band with Sky, and we're coming to that period where I guess it must have been quite hard for all of you to be in a band.
I think it was becoming harder for everybody to be around Sky, because like I said, around that era is when he started getting into drugs, and it got worse and worse as time went on, and some of it was probably the also, like you touched on too, the ego and the money and the this and the that. The popularity went to Sky's head more than anybody else, and he just became harder to work with, and thought the whole band, he thought eventually Sky Saxon was the Seeds, and he lost the reality of no. And I will say to this day, the Seeds it took 4 people to make this group work. Sky was sure a large part of it, but so was I, so was Jan, so was Rick, and later so was Don. It took that entity, that's the Seeds, not just Sky Saxon.
Absolutely, and I think that's a kind of interesting parallel as well with, I remember sort of when I was 13 and I discovered the Doors, and because when you're 13 you're looking for a hero like Jim Morrison to sort of like, all the kind of insecurities that you kind of have about the world and all, you want to look up to someone like that. And then actually as you get older, you kind of realise the more you learn about music, the more how important, how much heavy lifting was done by the rest of the band. And I feel like there's a kind of parallel here also with the Seeds, where if I listen now, I sort of, what I can hear, what kind of moves me, is kind of what's happening around Sky. And without it, you have this kind of, this personality that can kind of help inspire great music, but it's not the music. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
There's a lot of pieces falling together.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in the case of the Doors, certainly for me, I've been appreciated Morrison's, poetics or whatever, and his intellectualism in his writing, but for me, Doors, the attraction was always the melodies and the music.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And I'd say the Seeds is the same thing. I mean, it's the same thing as say the Ramones. I mean, we wouldn't listen to Joey Ramone singing by himself. We want to hear him with, it's the same way.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying, as a teenager, I always felt a little bit guilty that I kind of really liked the songs that had a Robbie Krieger writing credit on them.
Oh, yeah.
And
Light My Fire is the main one.
well, that's the one, yeah. So I guess before we go into the present tense, I just wanted to ask a little bit about this incredible record, Raw and Alive, Merlin's Music Box, which was it seems to be sort of re-establishing the sort of core brand in a way, and it seemed to be kind of reminding everyone of what it was that perhaps the Seeds did best of all. It had that effect even at the time, didn't it? It seemed to sort of remind people that this is really what a great live band the Seeds are.
I'm not sure how to approach that.
Well, all I can say is the reason why it happened was that you had Future, which didn't do as well as was intended. Certainly wasn't it wasn't, at least at the time, perceived as any kind of a masterpiece as Sky wanted. And then you had this wonderful little aberration, which is a record that the band had actually recorded in late 1966, a full program of blues, Full Spoon of CD Blues, which came out, but for whatever reason it was presented by the record label as under a pseudonym, Sky Saxon's Blues Band.
Well, the reason for that was too is they didn't think it would sell at all, because it was a true blues album. I mean, we did that. I'm glad we're touching on that a little bit. Worked with Muddy Waters on that album, and it was a great experience. It was a wonderful recording.
Muddy loved you, didn't he?
He did, yeah. And he was great to work with. He wrote one of the songs on there. He played harmonica on one of the songs, and he was just a down-to-earth, wonderful person. And it was a great experience to do that. It was.
How did you guys hook up?
Sky met him somehow. I think he met him at the Troubadour Club or something.
I think Arthur Lee was introduced him.
Okay. Right, yeah.
Either way,
Yeah.
And
he compared you to I think he said that you were
America's
the
Rolling
Stones were,
Stones.
you're America's Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was his Muddy Waters quote. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good day, isn't it, when you have someone like that saying something about you?
Yeah.
Anyway, just to go back to it, so we had this wonderful blues record, but of course it didn't really mean much in the Seeds sort of progression, because it wasn't really identified as a Seeds album. And then I think there was a decision made. The single, the end of 1966, 67, pardon me, was "The Wind Blows Your Hair," a wonderful song, which the band had recorded several times, but that didn't go anywhere. So I think, and then they jettisoned Lord Tim, because he was costing him a lot of money, basically. Costing Crescendo, he's sending Crescendo's bills for publicity and all this other kind of stuff. Yeah. So it was like, well, what do we do? And the band got involved with Nick Grillo, who's a booking agent for the Beach Boys and whatever. And and the first thing said, well, you guys need to cut a live album, and you show people.
Yeah, I was going to say it had a lot to do with the record company on that one.
Well, I think the goal was, because Future was a true studio album, I think that the goal was to try to capture that thing that happens in a live performance that you can't put on tape, right? Yeah. That's why you go to see live music. If you just wanted to hear the notes, they're nice and clear on a record, then you can sit at home. Yeah. But the energy that you experience with all the people together, it takes the band and it takes the audience, it takes everything to happen together. Sure, yeah. And I think at that time, I think a lot of bands were trying to figure out how do we capture that thing that we've never been able to put on tape. And so I think there were a lot of live albums at the time, and I think that was kind of the goal, was to get back, because I think the Future album kind of smoothed over the real band, the live band, the Seeds, and kind of became a production, which, you know, when there's only 4 guys, you don't get a production like that, you get energy. And to try to put that back out to people to go, no, they haven't fallen asleep. I mean, you know, that's not what happens in a show. But if you only got to the band via records,
right,
some people might have thought that. And so I think that was kind of the goal, was to get
well, it was definitely, you know, it was to showcase the best part of the band, you know, which was their in-person, you know, excitement. But I will just add that, you know, both the first album and Weber Sound are pretty much cut live. You know, I mean, in terms of yes, there's some overdubs, particularly on Weber Sound, but they were essentially tracked live. You know, Sky sang live on every take, and you know, certainly on the first album, virtually all of his vocals are the live vocal cut with the band. So there was, you know, there's even that wonderful quote from Jimmy Madden I used off on one of the reissues. It was a Sky, don't dance in front of the microphone, you know, stay on it. So I think, you know, Gene Norman certainly, probably more than anyone else, because he put out a lot of live albums over the GMP Crescendo catalog over the years. Said, you know, boys, you know, we need to get back to basics. So, but of course, the logistics of recording a live show, I don't know why they made this decision, but they decided to do something live at Western Studios with their fan club in attendance. And they did that, and for some reason the atmosphere wasn't quite there. So they went back and did another session live, and, you know, Sky using a handheld mic, as you can kind of tell, because he's all over the place, and cut the things for what eventually was used on Raw and Alive, which then, you know, subsequently got smothered with this live Beach Boys, was it? Or a Beach Boys show, I think. Library, you know, there's like screaming fans from a Beach Boys show, and that became the Raw and Alive thing. And I don't know, when I first heard that album in the 80s, I could, I loved the music I heard, and I really love some of the songs that are exclusive to that record, like Mumble and Bumble and Gypsy, Gypsy plays the drums and those things, Forest Outside Your Door. But, you know, it would drive me crazy, this all the way through it. It's like, I want to hear the band rocking, so it was so wonderful to come across the tape in the GMP Crescendo archive of the album without the sound effects on top.
I mean, that must be wonderful to just, that's like, that's the kind of thing I have dreams about. To just find something by one of my favourite bands that I didn't even know existed for sure in an archive. That must be why you do it, really.
Well, of course it is. I mean, that's the payoff, you know. And the payoff is getting to be friends with these, you know, our heroes, and you know, a groupie like me playing with them too. But I'll be honest with you, Peter. I mean, it's really, you know, it's you know, that aspect of things is, you know, if you're a real fan, it's one of the most. It really is like, you know, you're panning for gold, and you come across this thing that you either suspected it existed and hoped existed, and you actually find it, or something you had no idea about, and you come across it. I mean, I just a quick other example. I've been working with Shel Talmy, the, you know, producer recently, and, you know, one day I asked him, "Do you have any, you know, hey, you got any acetates around any Shel?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know." And I went and looked through his cupboard. I pulled out a blank acetate. It says David Jones on it. It's 5 unreleased David Bowie songs from 1965.
Alec has quite a collection of top secret things that we can't talk about, but even for us, I mean, just to be able to hear some of the things in Alec's private collection, we won't say how he
But it really is the archaeology and that part of the forensics of like going into, especially if it's a group like the Seeds, where, you know, because of the way they recorded, this sort of, you know, they were experimenting, but they recorded live, and they had this energy. It's always exciting to throw off a tape on the machine and say, what are we going to hear today? You know.
When did you first meet these guys, Alec?
Let's see. Well, I actually Daryl's not going to remember this, but this is very fortunate. In 1989, the 4 original Seeds, Sky, Daryl, Rick Andrews, drummer, and Jan Savage, they did a very short little tour, reunion tour in California. It was just after I moved to California. So I caught them playing at the Luther Burbank Arts Center up in Santa Rosa, and I went up and shook Daryl's hand. He said, "Oh, you're from England? Oh, yeah, I really like England." But I was wearing like a Union jacket.
You don't remember?
I remember. Yeah, I wouldn't remember that, honestly, that was Alec at that time, but I remember the show.
Yeah, okay.
But and then so anyway, well, obviously, then I started working the reissues for Ace, and that sort of started to snowball eventually, and it came to a point in about 2005, 2006 where I thought it's Seeds, I've done Music Machine, I've done Standell, I've done Chocolate Watch Band, which other garage rock titan who I worship, and the Seeds, and I got in touch with Neil Norman, who is the son of Gene Norman, the founder of the label, and now obviously the president since Gene has moved on. And Neil was at first like, well, we have our Seed stuff out, and we're happy with it, blah blah. I said, but Neil, can I go through the tapes and see what you have to? Oh, okay, let me think about it. And it just so happened one day, we pulled out a bunch of session tapes, and I always travel with a tape machine in the back of the car, and so I set it up in his living room so he couldn't say no. And put it on, and one of the first things we came across was the 15-minute full-length unedited Evil Hoodoo. This is like krautrock. It's just like relentless pummeling for 15 minutes. And he goes, "Wow, you found that?" So after that, it's like, fine, whatever you want.
So what I want to know is, obviously, as a fan, this is like a major, a moment that you never forget about. From your perspective as a musician. Is it a bit, what that old thing, what does he see in that? Or is it, do you know what I mean? Because sometimes with musicians, you can't, because you were there, you can't necessarily tell, you can't predict what it is that a super fan like Alec will come along and say, no, trust me, this is important.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I find a lot of things like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Find this whole conversation like that.
No, but anyway, yeah, it's just, I don't know, you look at it different,
Well, I think, of course, what I was going to say was that working on the catalogue for Ace Big Beat and doing the reissues, and that dovetailed with Neil's desire to do a film about the Seeds. Yeah. And that's when I reconnected with Daryl, met Jan for the first time, and then a little bit later we ran into Don, thankfully, at the tribute concert that was held for Sky in Los Angeles, right after he passed away in 2009. And so basically snowballed, Scott here, who's filming us right now, was the cameraman. And we, just basically spent, best part of that, was it 4 years, I think, 5 years, talking to as many people we could, building up. And in the process, I got to know Daryl and Jan and Don and everybody else. And it's wonderful to be, to spend time with people whose name you've looked at on album covers for years and whose music you listen to. What's this guy really like? Is he a great guy, or is he a... is he gonna...
It's the question.
I still haven't made my mind up about Daryl.
It's the question we all ask ourselves about the names on credits of records. So the film. So there is this feature-length documentary which tells the story of the Seeds, and it's a long time it was a long time in the making, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. We started in like 2008, I think, and it made its premiere, I should say, in 2014. And now, on Saturday, this coming Saturday, the 20th, is going to make its premiere in Europe at the Beat Bespoke Festival. The reason people are always going to ask, why isn't it on DVD, why isn't it being streamed, or blah blah. Well, the truth is, Neil Norman and myself, whenever I can make it, and Daryl too, and Don, he just, he's an old school record guy who directed this movie. He loves going out and meeting the people, so he loves to take it around to different cities in the United States, get up and talk about not just the Seeds but Crescendo and his dad and a lot of other things. And I think he's been having a real kick doing that for the past 5 years. Now I think we're probably getting into a mode where it will probably come out, be distributed in a wider form, sooner than later. I mean, the difference is that of course that Neil, as the owner of Crescendo, owns the masters and he owns the publishing. So, unlike a lot of rockumentaries that rely on having to get that stuff from another party, and therefore they're sort of behooving to them. So they try to rush it out to maximize it because they've got to pay a bunch of money to get these other things in. Neil can take his sweet time, with it. So that's. I think it's if you like rock and roll, if you're interested in rock and roll stories, I mean, Sky is one of the great characters, but it's not just about Sky. It's warm and affectionate about Sky, and you really don't, nobody's like looking vicariously at like his sort of, how his life went. But it's just as much about Daryl and Jan and Rick and of course Don and the other guys, and their participation in this wonderful rock and roll fable.
Is it surreal to sit in a cinema and see a film, a story like this about a band that you're actually in?
Yeah, I'd say it is. Yeah,
it's certainly unplanned. I mean, nobody would have expected.
No, exactly. You see yourself on the big screen. It's great. It's almost like a little short story. Pushin Too Hard was used in Air America with Mel Gibson. And I live in a small town area, and I went to the movie theater one night, and I went to the late showing, and I was the only person in the theater. And I sat right in the middle. I liked airplanes, and I liked Mel Gibson and whatever else. Whatever. I'm sitting in the middle of the theater. I had no clue whatsoever. Movie starts, and about 2 minutes into the movie, here the guy comes flying in over Los Angeles in a helicopter, and he's got the radio on, and he's talking about the traffic or something. And here's "Pushing Too Hard, push it on me," and I went, "What?" And the guy singing who's the other actor in that movie? I can't think of it right now. Robert Downey Jr. He's singing along with "Pushing Too Hard" as he's flying his helicopter or whatever, And I was just blown away, So, and then the same thing. The movie premiered in Hollywood at the Egyptian Theater. Huge, big deal. And all the fans showed up, young and old, and everybody else, and it was very exciting. And to see yourself on the big screen, it was quite an honor.
And these moments that you just can't. How could you have foreseen it as a young man?
You didn't. You couldn't.
Yeah, of course.
You never knew that it was even going to last at all.
What was the first show you? When do you actually formally enter the story as a seed, Don?
Just about the middle of 1968, I think. I got a phone call from Jan, and he said, "We're looking for a new drummer." I had been in a bunch of almost signed bands in Hollywood, and I went up to Malibu to Sky's house, and the funny thing was, when I got there, I unloaded my drums, and they told me, "Oh, we already found a drummer, so you don't need to play." And I went, "Oh," because the Seeds were, the biggest band in Hollywood, and I've listened to the Seeds for years, and loved the Seeds. And fortunately, very fortunately for me, the band's road manager, Richard, said, "Well, he came all the way out here, at least let him play." And I thought, well, if nothing else, I'll get to play 3 or 4 songs with the Seeds, right? And so we set up and we played, and Sky and Daryl and Jan went in the house. They came back out 15 minutes later and said, "Well, we told this other guy we didn't want him, and we would like you to play with the band." So I went from nothing to being in, the biggest band, the huge fairy tale.
And getting to know Sky a bit, like the point at which you would have got to know Sky, he was a star, and he would have been subject to the kind of effects, the vicissitudes of fame. Was he a pretty easy guy, as far as you're concerned? Was he a pretty easy guy to deal with?
Yeah, he was easy to get along, and I hung with Sky a lot.
Yeah.
At that point, Jan and Daryl were married. They had wives to go home to, but I was too young. I was still in high school at the time. I don't think they knew how young I actually was. And so yeah, I hung with Sky a lot in Malibu, and we had good times. Sky was a very gentle, sweet person.
Yeah.
But he would just kind of get out there sometimes, lose reality a little bit. That made it difficult. And then he did get a little more into drugs. Although my experience with him, even through the 1969 issue, I never saw some of the problems that other people saw. I didn't see them as problems.
Yeah. You just took him as you found him.
Yeah, pretty much.
And with all the sort of, in his post-Seeds life, with all the kind of vagaries of, the religious conversions and all of that stuff, did you stay in touch throughout all of that, or did he?
No. So I'll tell you a very funny story.
Yeah.
When I was at the band, Sky continued on, and somewhere in the mid-70s, Sky picked up a band he called them the Seeds, but to perform with him. a Hollywood band called Red Cross. You might know them.
Yeah, I know Red Cross.
Okay, so he picked up Red Cross to play, and they played some shows or some period of time, something. Anyway,
it was in the 80s.
This is at the 80s?
80s,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I can't remember what I had for breakfast, so okay, 80s is good. Anyway, my daughter was on the internet to somebody, and somebody said, well, I was the drummer with Sky. And she wrote him back, and she said, well, my dad was the drummer with Sky. And so they got together and met. Eventually, he married my daughter.
Wow.
So my daughter's father and husband both played with Sky in the series.
Amazing. Wow.
This is just crazy. And that is the very last time that I heard from Sky at all was an email actually to my daughter when he wrote. So Sky found out about this somehow. Yeah. Because, back in those days, it's not like now with social media and internet and all that. Yeah. I mean, I lost track of these guys. I didn't see them until the film premiere when we actually got. Well, I take that back. Yeah. They were at Sky's memorial, but we really hadn't got together and didn't know how to connect with each other till actually the movie premiere. Yeah. When the movie first showed, and we just got so many people that said, "Well, why don't you do this again?" And we didn't know there was that much interest, frankly.
Really?
Wow. There's always some interest, but like, will you come and see a show? Well, yeah. And the amazing thing to us is the shows is the younger people.
Well, I was going to say, what is the makeup?
I can see them in the front row, and they know all the words to all the songs. I don't know all the words to all the songs.
What's interesting to observe, is that obviously you and I, Pete, we're the same age, so we have known the history, and we know, and Sky has been, as I mentioned, the sort of the eccentric focal point for a lot of people's interest in Seeds, partly because of his, makes colourful copy, but he died in 2009. And he sort of scorched the earth, in not such a great way with some of his later musical efforts. Like I say, he's a wonderful man, as Don says, total peaceful soul, and I always will have utmost respect for him. But musically, he wasn't that interesting later years. It was really like hit or miss, to put it mildly. But of course, he died 10 years ago, and there's been a whole generation of kids that have learned Seeds music, not with him not being around and not really knowing Sky is eccentric. Yeah. They just know Seeds music.
And they want to hear their songs.
Right, and so they come along, they look at it, and they don't look at it from the point of view, that Sky Saxon isn't there anymore. They're seeing the Seeds and they're hearing the music. It's not a tribute band. It's not like the San Francisco Seeds tribute or something like that. It's the Seeds, the guys that own the name, ethically if nothing else, presenting the music that they created. For a newer generation. It's really not, and if I can be the Viagra for these guys, then all the better.
Thank you so much.
Let's say it's the real deal.
Well, and it carries on. It carries on. Like all great music, it carries on. It assumes new shapes with the passing of time. It stays alive, and long may it do so. And these expanded reissues are a joy. They haven't been off my CD player since I received them, so thank you very much. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you for your time and patience. Don Boomer, Alec Palao, Daryl Hooper.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be in England.
For more excellent music, you can scoot over to the Ace Records website, www.acerecords.co.uk. All the wonderful music you can possibly need.